First, we need to do a disclaimer. We are from Russia. We voted against Putin, against the ruling party. We went to the protests. We don't support his policies. Who can support war at all in their right mind? Nevertheless, despite the fact that the audience and I share the same position, we, Russian people, have been dragged into a war. Not as terrible as in Ukraine, obviously, because people are losing their lives over there. But Russians are losing all their means of livelihood. Here, just take a look at this list. 3M, Abbott Labs, Accenture, Acronis, Activision Blizzard, Adenza, Adidas, ADM, Adobe,
ADP, AECOM, AirCap, Airbnb, Airbus, Akame.
WPP plc, WWE, Xerox, Ukes, YouTube, Yum Brands, ZHA. These are all the companies that have left the territory of Russia or have restricted operations. More than 300 companies. One of the biggest losses for the economy was McDonald's. Here are some numbers for you. Across the country, 847 restaurants are closing. This will affect 62,000 employees. Yes, McDonald's has said it will carry on paying wages, but for how long? What if the isolation continues for a month, 2 months, a year? But it's not just the 62,000 people's wages that are at risk. Remember the episode about the containers or the wildfires? We were saying in both that everything is so interconnected that the true damage will be assessed later. Yes, it is now known that the loss to McDonald's will be $50 million a month. If I convert that amount into rubles, I'll have a heart attack. But McDonald's, on the one hand, has suppliers to purchase from. What damage to them is a big question, and on the other hand, McDonald's is often located in shopping malls. A huge share of the tenant's income is rent from McDonald's, which is not paid on a fixed basis but as a percent of the restaurant's sales. So, a huge amount of cash flow disappears here. On top of everything else, McDonald's is a point of attraction for people in the mall, which means that there will simply be fewer customers in the mall itself, which means that revenues will fall for all the other businesses in the building as well. In short, it's not just a business that trades in greasy and unhealthy food, it's a huge pillar of the economy that, if it collapses, will snag all nearby properties. Now, take one such example and scale it up to 350 companies. And by the time the video's released, there will be even more of them. Yes, it is clear that not all food chains are that big, but the thing that millions of people will lose their jobs is a fact. After all, the top 10 companies on this list alone employ 120,000 people. And you remember that when a company is closing, it strikes an even bigger punch to suppliers and tenants. And these 120,000 people cannot spend money anywhere else because there is no income. This, in turn, will hit a lot of other companies. In general, it will be bad for all. From my estimates, there is already a risk of losing jobs for about 10 million people in half a year, and that's while the overall working-age population in Russia is 75 million. In other words, there is a threat of 13% unemployment rate in the foreseeable future. After all, apart from whole markets leaving the Russian market, which causes shortages, there is also collapsing currency, which at the time of writing this script has dropped in value by 70%. As a result, we have a simple devaluation of the currency, prices go up, creation of a deficit due to restrictions and companies withdrawing from the market, prices go up, the fall of the national currency and an increased unemployment, purchasing power goes down. In other words, Russians have not only become poorer after 16 days of war due to a 70% drop in the currency, but their sources of income have also disappeared. Yes, we all say there is a war going on in Ukraine, but I want to point out with this video that there is also a war going on in Russia. It is an economic war, and the Russians are victims. Once again, I am not saying it is not Russia's fault. Russia made the first move, and Russia is the aggressor in this story. But Russia is too general of a word. Before we proceed to the next chapter, I need just a moment here. Since Putin has started his preposterous war with Ukraine, Google has imposed restrictions on Russian YouTubers. Our main channel, which happens to be Russian, can no longer be monetized, therefore it can't be the primary source of income for our team. Thus, we are now casting all our time, energy and effort on this channel. So that would be extra awesome if you'd share this video with your friends, foes, colleagues, relatives, with whoever. That would help us a lot in the current situation. Thank you. For starters, we have a system of governance. Moreover, we have a different management system from other countries. We call it Power Vertical. We've already mentioned it in our last video about manipulation with people's minds. Power Vertical is a system where if something is decided at the top, it means that no one below can question it. And if there is a dissenting voice at any level, they will simply be removed from office. Or they will be imprisoned. Or at the worst, killed. From recent examples, here you see Governor of Khabarovsk region, Sergei Fugel. In the US case, this is like a governor of a state. So Sergei Fugel was the only one who could confront Putin.
It is clear that there are many problems in primary healthcare today, but I would like to focus on the common problems that are present now in the Far East. I would like to stress that this issue requires a positive solution, not only in terms of money shortage, but even in terms of fairness, because people should receive primary health care first and foremost where they live.
On November the 25th, 2019, just after a year of his work as a governor, the FSB comes from Moscow to Khabarovsk in order to arrest him. He is accused of the alleged attempted murder in 2004 and another one in 2005. So that's 14 years ago. Here is also an important point. Fugel was moved directly to Moscow and not local pretrial detention center. Here is how it looks on a map so that you get the idea. The FSB arrived from there to here, grabbed the governor and brought him to Moscow. After that, there were mass protests in the region for a whole month. Here is another example, Boris Nemtsov, a very strong politician who had a long and successful career in government. Not only was he a rival to Putin personally, but he also said such things in public.
I have long wondered what arguments Putin has for behaving this way. Any arguments at all. The simplest answer was that he is a sick man. He is a mentally very sick man. The Serbsky Institute, the Kachenko Institute, doctors, nurses, injections from morning till night. That's what he needs. And then I thought, no, he's not just a sick man. He is also a cynical and a vile man, using this operation to occupy and annex Crimea. He wants to rule over us forever. We must say no to war. We must say stop to the idiocy and madness. We must say Russia and Ukraine without Putin. Russia and Ukraine without Putin. And finally,
Slava России! Slava Ukraine!
And here is another incredibly interesting video. 7 years ago, Nemtsov predicted a war in Ukraine.
Putin knows very well that Russia's potential, including the military, is very weak. He knows very well that it is possible to go to war with Ukraine, although it is not easy either, as it turned out, but it is impossible to go to war with the whole world. I've already explained the Russian economy is 16 times smaller than that of the West, and about 4 to 5 times smaller than that of China. Putin can go showing off, bluffing, grandstanding, scaring everybody and so on, but he certainly cannot do that, even if he wanted to. As for Ukraine specifically, he's taking revenge for the anti-criminal revolution, for the crook who was ousted as president. And Putin cannot allow that to happen to him either. Secondly, he's taking revenge for Ukraine's choice towards Europe. So of course he wants to harm Ukraine globally, but he can't do much. He wanted to create a Nova Russia from Donetsk to Odessa, and it didn't work out. He was left with some chunks of Donetsk and Lugansk regions. But of course he will not come to terms with it. He will be waiting for an appropriate moment to come up with some other nasty thing. What kind? I don't know yet. Basically, he has no global strategy. Putin is a man who thinks tactically, not strategically. His whole global dream, idea, and destiny are how to maintain power, personal power. And he will act to keep it for as long as possible, for life. Which of course is very bad for Russia and Ukraine and the whole world. But this is exactly his main task. Everyone says that he wants the Russian world. This is absolute bullshit. If he wanted the Russian world, he would be defending Russians in Turkmenistan. There are Russians being kicked out of flats in Turkmenistan. Did you know that? They're kicked out if they do not renounce Russian citizenship. Why don't they send troops there?
On February the 27th, 2015, Boris Nemtsov was shot dead across from the Kremlin in Moscow. Although 5 perpetrators were jailed, the person who ordered the hit has not yet been found to this day. On the Russian channel, we did a whole series of videos on Power Vertical. If you're interested in understanding the nature of the Russian governance system and why people do not seem to be taking to the streets protesting, write about it in the comments. But to put it roughly, the Power Vertical is a scheme of selecting people for the country's system of governance. Moreover, it is based on bribes, so that if anything happens, this fact can be used against the individual as leverage. If you vote for the bills that Putin requires you live happily ever after, your answer is no, at best you'll be fired. And if someone starts behaving honestly, really developing their region, for example, well, you know the result. And I now understand why Nemtsov was assassinated in 2015, Fergal was jailed in 2019, and in 2020 the FSB tried to poison the country's main opposition figure, Alexei Navalny. We can add not only government officials to Power Vertical, but also oligarchs who pretend to be businessmen, so to speak. And here they are directly responsible for what happens to the country, because this is the governance system. And under the system of governance, we have citizens whom I would divide into 6 categories. The first, laymen. They are uneducated, with primitive interests and goals in life. They live for today, they do not know how to plan, set goals and achieve them. The most important thing for them is to have money for a can of beer and a working TV. They are the most vulnerable target of state propaganda, because the loser in life compensates for his or her worthlessness by adhering to a large and powerful group. This phenomenon is called in-group favoritism. We will talk about this phenomenon from a psychological point of view a little later, so subscribe to the channel. When laymen are deprived of something, they pretend that it is not they who have been deprived, but they themselves have refused. For example, this is how they respond to the West by smashing an iPad, or this by pouring a Coke on the ground.
Вот наш ответ на санкции американцам. Вот, видели? Мы не боимся вас. Вот вам ваши всякие эти красивые штучки модные. Мы без них проживем. На, Арсений, добивай его.
О, санкционочка. В магазине сказали, последняя бутылка. А хрен там. Мне просто нужна тара на весну для березового сока.
In general, to put it mildly, the level of education and culture could have been higher. The second, the opportunists of the vertical of power. In their time, they realized that there was no free market in Russia, no investment, and no development without the goodwill of the Tsar. So they made a deal with the devil and exchanged their conscience for comfortable living conditions. The third, these are the close associates of the opportunists. Their conscience tells them not to ask where their husband, wife, brother, sister, father and mother get their money from. It makes them feel safer. This is how self-deception occurs for the sake of a carefree life. The fourth, opposition, opponents of the regime. As a rule, they are active people, entrepreneurs, skilled workers. They are educated. They're constantly learning new things. They're in a hurry. They're always tight on time. They are those who are not afraid to go to the protests despite the real threat of being imprisoned. Others send money to human rights organizations, or at least they go to elections to vote against the current regime. More often than not, these people know English. They have traveled the world. They have seen other countries. They are the bright future of this country. The fifth, those who have tried their whole lives to avoid politics and turn a blind eye to it. The sixth, crazy conspiracy theorists. Well, there are plenty of them in all countries. So, now the main question, how to deal with the current sanctions, and this is a very complex question. To begin with, let's put aside all emotions from a geopolitical point of view, no matter how hard it is for us. And let's look at the map. Ukraine, quite literally, acts as a shield for Europe. All economic sanctions are initiated by the EU and the US to dry Russia up. Why, you might ask? So that Russia won't go any further than Ukraine. This is because it opens the way to Romania, Hungary, Slovakia and half of Poland through Ukraine, and through friendly Belarus to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. So, for the time being, the EU and the US are acting quite understandably in the interests of their own people, to stop the bloodshed without losing the blood of their own. That is why they are now shutting down Russia's economy, trying to literally paralyze it. Moreover, this way the indignation of the Russians is provoked in order to encourage them to change their system of governance. In short, to start a civil war, which by the way is said openly.
The idea of these sanctions is to put pain onto the economy. We're not trying to figure out how to advance the Russian economy right now. It is for the general population to feel enough distress that the economy fails and the government fails. That's the point of these sanctions and the point of these goes.
The logic here is clear, but there is a risk that Putin could turn into a terrorist with a nuclear bomb, guarded by 100,000 armed soldiers, and everything around him would be in ruins, including the lives of citizens. And such life can last 2 or 5 or 10 years. Professor Sonnenfeld mentions the example of the 1986 trade embargo in South Africa, except that it took 3 years for President Botha to resign, and I assure you Putin will only step down from office if he goes feet first. So does Belarusian President Lukashenko. The West is trying to avoid using its forces. That is why they do not close the sky, meaning they don't activate NATO's air defense system. That is why they were slow in accepting Ukraine into NATO. That is why they are slow with accepting them into the EU. No one wants to lose their people and engage in open war with Putin. He has a nuclear suitcase, after all. And that is normal. I am in no way criticizing the presidents of other countries. A president should protect his own people first and foremost, which is what the presidents of Western countries do, which is what Mr. Zelensky does. But here's what we need to learn from here. Putin started a war and went after Ukraine. The West and the US cannot ignore this from a reputational point of view because it is a direct spit on the leaders of those countries. But also from a pragmatic point of view, because delirious Putin could go after NATO countries, and that would be World War III. By the way, this is the reason why Ukraine will not be accepted into NATO until everything settles down. there is a real opportunity for the West to get away with fewer losses, to dry Russia up economically, thus stopping the invasion, and preferably to provoke the Russians into a civil war in order to dethrone and replace their leader. Everything looks great if you exclude the human cost aspect, because there are thousands of people dying in Ukraine. In Russia, millions will fall into poverty. Millions of people in Europe will pay more for natural gas, and millions of people in the US will pay more for gasoline. And it's only been 17 days of war. Something tells me Putin will go down in history as the Mad King. The purpose of our video is to move away from the generalizations that make us perceive this chaos one-sidedly and put labels on entire nations. And here I would like to ask you a question. Who is the economic war aimed against? Let's get back to our categories of Russian people. The nominally zeroth category is the power vertical and the oligarchs, then followed by the citizens, the laymen, the opportunists, their families, the opposition, the apolitical, and the insane. And who exactly was affected by the sanctions? Absolutely everyone. So, I have some questions. Perhaps you, the English-speaking audience, can help us find the answers. I understand when they freeze the oligarchs' accounts, ban them from flying, seize their real estate in yachts. I understand when restrictions are imposed on Russian officials. I understand when a ban is imposed on central bank assets and even on oil imports. But I don't understand at all what the idea is of McDonald's or IKEA, for example, leaving the market. Do our officials eat fast food and buy budget furniture? Hell, they spend $500 for lunch and build their luxurious houses to look like imperial palaces. But McDonald's and IKEA are used by ordinary citizens. Alright, let's say the West is trying to teach people a lesson. But people from the first category are likely to become even more angry with the West and/or try to pretend that they don't care. The second and third are more likely to try to leave to another country or a quieter place. The fourth, they are the opposition. Well, they're already being sacrificed. They suffer just for the fact that they are Russians. Maybe the fifth may understand something, but it is far from certain that they will turn into activists. And I'm not even speaking about the sixth. But okay, IKEA and McDonald's have a wide and diverse audience. But take Netflix or Spotify, they are used precisely by Western-oriented Russians who go to protests, donate to human rights organizations, and oppose Putin's regime. This most often is the audience from the category number 4. Why cut them off from the world? What role do they play in this game if they've been against it for such a long time? Explain it to me. Or this boy, for example, what did he do that got him cut off from the mobile game?
Чё ты расстроился? Так восстановит еще, чё ты? Ненадолго это. Не расстраивайся, чё ты?
Or us, for example. We are like this little boy who has been cut off from all ways of monetization on YouTube in Russia. Why not only block propaganda channels? Isn't it more logically and ethically correct to keep the voices of those who are against the war? But no, in Russia, YouTube itself has destroyed the blogging profession. And it's kind of okay for us. We have a small chance of earning some cents by making videos for you. By the way, thank you for watching and sharing our stuff with your friends, because it's the only source of income for us right now, and our patrons really are the heroes.
Western companies are doing the right thing. All Russians are to blame for what is happening.
Oh, really? Is there really no fault of the West at all? Honestly, I didn't want to throw any accusations in this situation because it's simply stupid. But I very often see comments like this, that Russians don't do shit, and they are the only ones to blame. Okay, let's suppose that. Suppose that we just kept quiet, or even supported that we were being robbed by a so-called legally elected president. Okay, they were robbing in Russia, but where were they spending the stolen money? Let me show you something. We will now go to the Russian Central Bank website and look at the amounts that individuals have transferred to other countries. That is, we will now look at how much money citizens have withdrawn from Russia and sent it to which countries. Which country do you think comes first? Those who know would say Tajikistan or Uzbekistan because there are a lot of migrants from there in Moscow. But no. Number 1 is Switzerland. In 2019, Russian citizens transferred over $6 billion there. The US and the UK are also at the top. And the UK is actually quite friendly to our oligarchs. They occupy honourable 8th, 9th, 10th places in the list of the richest people in the country over there. Abramovich, Usmanov and Friedman. These, by the way, are all those people against whom sanctions are now being imposed. But why haven't they imposed them before? Latvia, Spain, Cyprus and Germany are also on the list. Do you know what else we can do? Sort countries by the average transaction amount, that is, how much money is wired per transfer on average. It's a wonderful picture, to be honest. Monaco, $218,000. Keep in mind the country is a member of the UN, the OSCE, the Council of Europe and Interpol. By the way, the villa of Alina Kabayeva, Putin's unannounced wife, is located there. The villa is called Villa del Mer on the Côte d'Azur in the town Roquebrune-Cap-Martin near Monaco. The villa formerly belonged to the Tsarian dictator Mobutu. Symbolic, isn't it? $218,000. This is despite the fact that the official salary of a State Duma member is $7,000 and Putin's official salary is $12,000. And somehow it turns out that they were transferring an average of $218,000 into the country. How can this be? Next are Liechtenstein, Austria, Spain, Israel, Netherlands, Italy, Switzerland, France, Germany. How could it happen that when they were buying real estate and yachts abroad, which are now being seized, the currency control didn't check them back then, the legitimacy of the sources of funds wasn't revealed? I think everyone knew everything. But as we say in Russia, money doesn't stink. Gentlemen, my job is only to provide you with the full picture of what is going on, taking into account all the ambiguous and controversial elements. If you want to blame someone in particular, then name all of those to blame. And I am infinitely glad that people like Paolo Arduino, Bitfinex's chief technology officer, are showing up during this crusade against all Russians. He has refused to block the accounts of all Russians except those who have been sanctioned. Our view is that the actions of a government do not necessarily represent the wishes of individuals. Unless we are otherwise directed by the regulatory authorities by which we are governed, we want to protect the accounts of all our customers. Or another example, Jerry Brito, the executive director of non-profit crypto policy advocate group Coin Center, at the start of March also called for global cryptocurrencies to continue serving non-sanctioned Russian people, stating, "I'll say that the frenetic rush to sever all ties with Russia seems a bit out of control, perhaps rising to the level of a moral panic, and it could easily play right into Putin's hands. It's not only Russian cats that have been banned from international competition, but a global cancer treatment non-profit has cut off Russian doctors and patients. Airbnb is restricting not just Russian hosts, but also Russian users from making new reservations as guests. Even OnlyFans has frozen the accounts of Russian and Belarusian models. What's more likely, that the Russian people affected by these boycotts will blame Putin and rise up against him, or that they will feel betrayed by the Western companies they trusted and depended on and will be more receptive to Putin's propaganda. So, I suggest that we shift our focus to the fact that Putin is everyone's enemy, both for Ukraine, for Russia, and for the rest of the globe. There is no need to direct your anger at the Russians who do not support this terror. We are your allies. And I beg you, when you meet a Russian, you're likely to meet a fella from the fourth category, which has been against all that mess for a long time. You don't have to infringe or discriminate them, just because they were born a little further away from you.